The Karzoon sector had always been calm, a place where nothing unexpected ever happened. It was controlled by the Zevral Union, one of the oldest and most powerful alien governments in the galaxy. Their fleets patrolled every trade route, and their sensors watched every inch of space. Orthus Prime, the capital planet of the sector, was surrounded by massive orbital stations that had never failed to detect an intruder. Generations of alien citizens believed their home was untouchable, protected by technology refined over thousands of years. On this particular cycle, everything seemed normal. Cargo ships moved between lanes, defense fleets followed their assigned paths, and the Command Council monitored routine data streams. Deep inside the main observation station above Orthus Prime, long-range sensors suddenly registered a disturbance. It was small at first, almost dismissed as background noise, but the signal did not behave like natural interference. It was steady, focused, and moving directly into the sector. Automatic systems attempted to classify the object, but no known profile matched. It was not using a jump gate. It did not create a warp signature, and it did not announce itself. The object simply appeared at the edge of known space, moving forward as if the rules of travel did not apply to it. Alert signals spread through the station, drawing the attention of analysts and military officers. Sector Commander Vale Thorin was notified within seconds. He was a veteran of many conflicts and had never faced a situation he could not control. Aboard his flagship, Dominion of Ashes, he reviewed the data personally. The display showed a single dark shape. Its mass readings were inconsistent, and its energy output was almost non-existent. Yet it was clearly moving with purpose. Vale Thorin ordered additional scans, convinced that this was either a malfunction or an unregistered probe. As the object crossed deeper into Karzoon space, more sensors began to fail, not shut down, but struggle. Readings arrived late or incomplete, as if reality itself hesitated around the object. Technicians worked frantically, recalibrating systems that had never required adjustment before. Even artificial intelligence cores failed to provide predictions. The object did not behave according to any known physics model. The commander ordered nearby patrol fleets to shift positions, not to attack, but to observe. Confidence still ruled the command decks. Unknown ships had entered Zevral territory before, and none had survived long. The object showed no weapons fire, no shields, no visible thrusters. It did not react to scans or hails. It simply continued its slow, deliberate advance toward Orthus Prime. On the planet below, the civilian population remained unaware. Life continued as normal. Markets were busy. Transport grids moved millions of citizens, and the idea of danger felt impossible. The Zevral Union had not lost a capital world in recorded history, and no enemy had ever crossed the inner defense ring. Back in orbit, tension quietly grew. The object was now close enough to be seen directly through long-range visual arrays. It absorbed surrounding light, appearing like a cut in space rather than a physical structure. Officers exchanged uneasy glances. Some felt instinctive fear, though none could explain why. The ship did not threaten them, yet its presence felt final. Vale Thorin requested authorization from the High Command Council, but responses were delayed. Communication lag increased as the object moved closer. It was as if the sector itself was falling behind time. The commander realized that this was not a random encounter. Whatever had entered Karzoon space knew exactly where it was going. The unknown ship slowed slightly as it approached the central defense perimeter. Still silent, still unchallenged. Every weapon platform tracked it automatically, waiting for an order that did not come. No alarms were sounded yet, because there was no clear violation to respond to. And that uncertainty frightened the command staff more than an open attack ever could. In that moment, before the first shot, before the first loss, the galaxy still believed it was in control. No one aboard the stations or ships understood that history had already shifted. The entry of the unknown warship was not the beginning of a battle. It was the beginning of a judgment. And the Karzoon sector was already standing on the wrong side of it. As the unknown object moved deeper into Karzoon space, confusion spread across every command center in the sector. Analysts worked non-stop, feeding data into prediction engines, historical archives, and threat assessment systems. But every result came back empty. No civilization matched the design. No weapon profile fit its behavior. and no known species traveled without leaving some kind of energy trail. The object was officially labeled Black Mass Object X9, not because it explained anything, but because Command needed a name to report. Visual scans revealed more unsettling details. The surface of the ship did not reflect stars or nebula light. Instead, light bent and faded near it, giving the impression that space itself was thinning around the hull. There were no visible weapon ports, no engine flares, no rotating structures. It did not look unfinished or damaged. It looked complete, intentional, as if it had been built to exist outside observation. Commander Vale Thorin ordered all available sensor types to focus on the object. Gravitational scanners showed unstable readings. Mass estimates shifted every second. Quantum systems returned contradictory data. Some instruments claimed the ship was massive beyond calculation, while others suggested it barely existed. Technicians whispered that their machines were arguing with reality, and no one laughed at the comment. The lack of response from the object disturbed Command more than open hostility would have. Multiple communication attempts were made using trade frequencies, military channels, and even ancient diplomatic signals reserved for first contact. Every message vanished into silence. There was no acknowledgement, no interference, not even rejection. It was as if the object did not recognize communication as a concept worth reacting to. Believing caution was still unnecessary. Vale Thorin ordered the Crimson Halo Armada to reposition closer to Orthus Prime, along with the Iron Spiral Wing. These fleets had crushed rebellions and pirate coalitions with ease. Their presence was meant to reassure the sector. Officers spoke confidently, stating that even if the object was hostile, it would be neutralized within moments. Yet subtle signs of unease crept into every deck. Navigation systems reported micro delays. Fleet formations required constant correction, and encrypted messages between ships took longer to arrive. Nothing failed completely, but nothing felt stable either. It was as if the sector itself was adjusting to the presence of something it had never been designed to hold. Vale Thorin studied the object from the command throne of the Dominion of Ashes. His instincts told him this was not a scouting vessel or a lost traveler. Its path was too precise, its speed too controlled. It was not exploring, it was approaching, and it did not hesitate. For the first time in his long career, he issued orders without full confidence behind them. The High Command Council demanded updates, pressing for threat levels and engagement options, but Vale Thorin could not give clear answers. The object had not fired, had not violated any direct military boundary, and had not behaved aggressively. Declaring it an enemy without cause would set a dangerous precedent, yet allowing it closer felt equally reckless. The balance between protocol and instinct grew thinner with every passing moment. Civilian monitoring agencies began to notice irregularities as well. Long-range commercial scans showed strange signal shadows, and civilian navigation charts required emergency updates. Rumors started spreading quietly among traders and station workers. Something was moving through the sector, something that even the military did not understand. As Black Mass Object X9 crossed another invisible marker toward the core of the sector, automated defense platforms tracked it with growing urgency, targeting systems locked on and recalculated thousands of times per second, waiting for a firing command. Yet none came. The object remained silent, unchanged, and unstoppable in its advance. In the end, the greatest fear was not what the ship might do, but what it refused to do. It did not threaten. It did not warn. It did not explain. It behaved as though the galaxy around it was already accounted for, as though outcomes had been calculated long before its arrival. By the time the object reached the outer boundary of Orthus Prime's defense grid, the Zevral Union still believed it had time. Time to analyze, time to respond, time to control the situation. None of them realized that the moment for understanding had already passed, and that the galaxy was only waiting for the next decision made by something far older, far calmer, and far more certain than they were. The tension inside the Karzoon sector reached a breaking point as Black Mass Object X9 crossed the final monitoring line before Orthus Prime. Every screen on every command deck followed its movement, silent and steady, refusing to react to scans or warnings. Commander Vale Thorin stood unmoving aboard the Dominion of Ashes, his officers waiting for an order that would define their future. Protocol demanded action. Silence was no longer acceptable in the presence of an unknown force so close to the heart of the sector. After long hesitation, Vale Thorin authorized a warning maneuver, not an attack. Not yet. The cruiser ZK Ravager was selected, a respected warship known for precision and discipline. Its mission was simple: move ahead of the object and fire a controlled energy burst across its path. A signal meant to say stop, identify yourself, or turn back. Nothing more. The order was transmitted, and the Ravager accelerated into position. As the cruiser locked its firing solution, something strange occurred. Sensor data from the Ravager began to distort, distance readings fluctuated, and timestamps failed to align. The crew reported a brief sensation of pressure, like gravity tightening around the ship, before any shot could be fired. Space ahead of the Ravager bent inward, not violently, not suddenly, but smoothly, like fabric being folded. Then the Ravager vanished, not destroyed, not exploded, simply gone in the same instant. The entire Crimson Halo armada, positioned in formation behind it, disappeared as well. Dozens of warships erased from existence without debris, without radiation spikes, without echoes. Command screens froze, then refreshed to show empty coordinates where thousands of lives had been seconds before. For several heartbeats, no one spoke. Alarms failed to sound because no systems could define what had happened. It was not an attack according to any known rule. It was not a weapon discharge. It was absence, the kind that systems were never programmed to detect. Commander Vale Thorin demanded confirmation, assuming a sensor malfunction. Multiple independent arrays were checked, civilian traffic sensors, deep space beacons, even manual visual arrays, all confirmed the same truth. The fleet was gone, completely, without warning or resistance. Panic crept into the voices of officers who had never known fear. Only then did analysts revise the object's classification. Black Mass Object X9 was no longer considered unknown. It was considered impossible. Its behavior suggested control over fundamental forces. Not firepower, not shields, but space itself. The term human warship appeared in fragmented historical databases, linked to forgotten records and dismissed myths. A name followed shortly after: HWS Oblivion. Before command could react further, the object transmitted its first response, not to the warning shot, but to its absence. A tight, focused signal burst across military frequencies, civilian channels, and ancient diplomatic bands simultaneously. The signal was not encrypted. It did not hide. It simply existed, waiting to be heard. The voice that followed was calm, steady, and unmistakably organic. The speaker identified himself as Admiral Elias Crow of the United Human Stellar Command. He did not acknowledge the destroyed fleet. He did not threaten retaliation. He stated one sentence, clear and measured, that the boundary had been crossed and correction had been applied. Nothing more. The words struck harder than any weapon. There was no anger, no pride, no emotion at all, just certainty. The realization spread quickly that the disappearance of the Crimson Halo Armada had not been an act of war. It had been a demonstration, brief, precise, and final. On Orthus Prime, emergency alerts finally reached civilian networks. Confusion turned into fear as news of the vanished fleet leaked. Evacuation protocols were discussed, then abandoned. There was nowhere to run. The enemy, if it could still be called that, had not engaged in battle. It had removed obstacles. Commander Vale Thorin felt the weight of responsibility settle over him. His decision to authorize the warning had changed everything. Yet, he understood that any other choice would have led to the same result. The human ship had not reacted emotionally. It had responded logically, as if the outcome had already been determined long before the Ravager moved into position. As the HWS Oblivion continued its advance, unchallenged now, the Zevral Union faced a truth it had never considered: that there existed a power beyond escalation, beyond defense, beyond victory or defeat. A power that did not fight fleets, but removed them from relevance. In the silence that followed the disappearance of the Crimson Halo Armada, the galaxy took its first real breath of fear. Not because it had been attacked, but because it had been measured, found wanting, and corrected without hesitation. A few moments after the disappearance of the Crimson Halo Armada, the HWS Oblivion transmitted a message across the entire Karzun sector. It was brief, calm, and deliberate. The voice identified itself as Admiral Elias Crow of the United Human Stellar Command. The transmission did not demand surrender. It did not threaten annihilation. It only stated that a boundary had been crossed and that corrective measures had been applied. The simplicity of the statement sent shockwaves through every command deck and observation station in the sector. Analysts scrambled to identify the sender. The name human had not appeared in any operational records for thousands of cycles. Humans were thought to be a primitive, isolated species from the Sol fringe expanse, incapable of interstellar travel beyond their own minor spiral arm. Most historians assumed humanity had long ago failed to survive the great intergalactic wars. And yet here they were, speaking across the void as if nothing could stop them. Panic spread through the High Command Council on Orthis Prime. Scholars and strategists attempted to find records of past encounters with humans. Even minor myths and legends were examined, most dismissed, some questioned. Yet no explanation satisfied the evidence before them. The fleet had vanished, the humans had spoken, and nothing matched the logic of either action. Civilian populations below, initially unaware of the fleet's disappearance, began to hear fragments of communication. Strange messages in alien tongues describing a species that had been underestimated for centuries. Traders and station workers exchanged anxious whispers. Old tales of humanity as a simple, fragile species no longer made sense. And fear grew because the unknown now had a name, a face, and a voice. Commander Velthorin struggled to maintain order aboard the Dominion of Ashes. His officers were in shock. They had trained for combat, for strategy, for diplomacy, yet none had prepared for an opponent who did not play by any known rules. Velthorin replayed the transmission countless times, analyzing tone, frequency, and content, trying to find a hint of weakness, a clue to intention. But there was none, only certainty. The message itself was chilling because it did not need to be loud or aggressive. It carried the weight of authority and precision. The humans did not explain why they were capable of erasing fleets. They did not claim ownership of the sector. They simply stated a fact and waited. The absence of arrogance made the threat even more terrifying. For the first time, the Zevral Union understood that some power could act without ego, without provocation, and still achieve total effect. The historical record of humanity was quickly revisited. Scholars pored over ancient Sol fringe expanse data, piecing together fragments that suggested humans had survived wars, natural disasters, and isolation with a cunning that few species could comprehend. Their technological development had been slow to outsiders, but the old records underestimated their ingenuity. And now, in the space above Orthis Prime, that ingenuity was visible in its purest form. Across the sector, fleets of the Zevral Union remained frozen, awaiting orders, their sensors still locked on the HWS Oblivion, trying to determine how to respond. But every moment spent analyzing increased the weight of inevitability. The humans did not need to fight to dominate the situation. Their mere presence dictated the terms. The sector had no choice but to react to them. And that reaction was fear, not preparation. Velthorin convened a council meeting. His officers suggested countermeasures, tactical strikes, or even retreat. Yet all proposals seemed insignificant against the simple logic of the transmission. Admiral Crow had not reacted emotionally. He had not provoked. He had stated a fact and allowed its consequences to unfold. And that quiet command terrified even the bravest officers. Meanwhile, communications officers intercepted fragments of signals that suggested HWS Oblivion had allies. Other vessels of the United Human Stellar Command observing silently, their purpose unclear. But their presence implied that the event was not random, not accidental, and not negotiable. The humans were there to establish control through demonstration, not battle. And every system in the sector began to understand that the era of underestimating humanity had ended. By the time the council concluded, Orthis Prime and the surrounding defenses were already adjusting to a new reality, one in which humans were no longer considered insignificant. The weight of history, technology, and survival instinct converged into a single truth. The humans were present, the fleet had been removed, and now the galaxy had only one choice: to listen and remember the new rulers of consequence. The Zevral Union had never faced a threat like the HWS Oblivion, yet instinct and protocol demanded a response. Commander Velthorin ordered the deployment of the sector's ultimate weapons, the Star Sunder Array, a planet-killer platform capable of destabilizing stars, and every flagship in the fleet, including the Dominion of Ashes, went to full combat readiness. Alarms blared across command decks, energy shields hummed, and the crews of thousands of vessels braced for battle, every officer believing that the galaxy's mightiest weapons could still stop the unknown human ship. As the human vessel moved closer, not a single shot had been fired yet, and that absence unnerved Vale Thorin more than any attack could have. Sensors reported no shields, no energy fluctuations, no defensive maneuvers. Yet the human ship advanced steadily, each movement precise, deliberate, and unthreatened by the Zevral Union's display of force. The fleets adjusted positions repeatedly, trying to anticipate a reaction that never came. Vale Thorin gave the command to fire a concentrated strike from the Star Sunder array, targeting coordinates calculated to neutralize the HWS Oblivion in one decisive blow. Dozens of energy channels converged. Stars on observation panels glimmered as raw power prepared to move. And the crews waited for the reaction that would define their survival. Yet before the first pulse could leave the weapon, the unimaginable occurred. The HWS Oblivion responded without firing a weapon, without shields, without any traceable energy emission. The space around Orthus Prime distorted, gravity and light bending in a pattern that machines could barely track. The fleet trembled as thousands of tons of armor and metal became irrelevant. The Star Sunder array misfired, its energy dispersing into the void as if the human ship had rewritten the rules of physics. One by one, flagship after flagship, cruiser after cruiser, the fleets of the Zevral Union began to vanish, not in explosions, not in collisions, but in silence. Dominion of Ashes shuddered as Vale Thorin's own ship began to fade, alarms screaming warnings, lights flickering, crew members gripping consoles, unable to comprehend how trained hands, advanced technology, and careful strategy were being rendered meaningless in moments. Observers on Orthus Prime's surface saw nothing, yet the orbital stations transmitted reports of entire squadrons disappearing in seconds. Panic replaced discipline. The command structure collapsed as communication between ships became impossible. Tactical systems failed to update in real time, and for the first time in recorded history, the Zevral Union was powerless to respond to a force it could not see. Admiral Crow's voice finally came across communication channels, calm, controlled, stating nothing of threat, nothing of victory, only that corrective action had been applied. Vale Thorin tried to counter with tactical commands, forming new lines, recalculating attack vectors, even retreating to secondary positions. But each adjustment failed, as if the human ship anticipated every movement before it happened. Minutes passed, yet they were enough to erase centuries of security and preparation. Fleets that had been the backbone of the sector, the pride of the Zevral Union, were gone. Stars continued to burn, planets trembled from the gravitational distortions, and the people below realized that the ultimate power of the humans was not just in destruction, but in control of outcome. The HWS Oblivion had demonstrated that conventional warfare was meaningless. Vale Thorin, watching from the bridge of what remained, understood the magnitude of the loss. The humans did not need to attack with conventional weapons because they had the power to remove resistance entirely. It was precise, unemotional, and final. The fleet had lasted minutes. The galaxy's strongest defenses had lasted minutes, and that was enough to teach the Zevral Union a lesson it could not ignore. When silence finally returned, after the disappearance of nearly all defense forces, only a few scouting and support ships remained, shaken and uncoordinated. The sector lay in ruins, not by fire or explosion, but by the absence of forces that once ruled it. Commander Vale Thorin and his surviving officers realized the humans had not sought conquest, but demonstration, and the implications were worse than any battle they could have imagined. The HWS Oblivion did not celebrate, did not gloat. It continued its path, steady and unthreatened, leaving behind a galaxy that had learned too late that resistance was optional when facing a species that could enforce outcomes instantly. And for the first time, the Zevral Union understood that its strength had been irrelevant from the moment the humans appeared. As the HWS Oblivion moved past the remnants of the Zevral Union fleets, scanners began detecting other signals in deep space. At first faint, almost impossible to interpret. And then more clearly, multiple human vessels appeared, each one moving silently and deliberately, names appearing on monitoring systems such as HWS Final Oath, HWS Silent Verdict, and HWS Memory of Earth. The realization struck immediately that the HWS Oblivion had not been alone. The destruction of the fleets had been a single act, part of a coordinated operation, not a random strike. Commander Velthorin, aboard what remained of the Dominion of Ashes, felt a cold weight in his chest. The surviving officers stared at the screens, eyes wide with disbelief. The human vessels were not firing, not communicating aggressively, not even taking visible action. And yet, their presence made every defensive measure in the sector irrelevant. The humans were not there to fight conventionally. They were there to observe and perhaps to judge. Analysts worked feverishly to determine how these ships avoided detection for so long, how they moved without energy signatures, without warp trails, without shields. It was as if the universe itself had been rewritten to allow them passage. Attempts to classify them failed repeatedly. Every prediction system concluded incorrectly. Every calculation was rendered useless. The humans operated outside the assumptions the Zevral Union had built their entire strategy upon. The surviving fleets, scattered and panicked, attempted to regroup, but there was no coordinated response possible. No attack plan could account for forces that seemed to exist only when necessary and vanish when challenged. The very structure of command collapsed under the pressure of understanding. Velthorin realized that his own tactical knowledge was no longer sufficient, that the humans had bypassed centuries of strategy with technology and foresight that seemed impossible. Meanwhile, transmissions from the HWS Oblivion continued, short and precise, stating only facts, correcting assumptions, and signaling that the galaxy had failed to meet human standards of containment. The tone was neither hostile nor friendly. It was final, and it forced every listener to consider that survival might not depend on strength, numbers, or alliances, but on whether the humans decided to allow it. Reports from other sectors began arriving. Observers who had witnessed the human fleet in different areas described similar patterns. Ships that appeared without warning, erased fleets, and then waited silently for the consequences to settle. Admiral Crow's strategy was clear. Demonstrate power without destruction beyond necessity, and enforce the new rules of engagement by absolute control rather than combat. The galaxy had never experienced such precision. Velthorin attempted to advise the High Command Council, suggesting retreats, redirection of remaining forces, even attempts at negotiation. But the Council quickly realized there were no options within conventional thinking. Nothing in their archives, no historical precedent, no weapon, could alter the reality imposed by the humans. The sector existed on borrowed time, and the humans had already decided the outcome. Communication between human vessels revealed no chatter beyond the necessary coordination. They were not celebrating. They were not coordinating attacks. They were not even visible in most subspace scans. They simply existed, silently enforcing presence and demonstrating that fleets, defenses, and even entire empires could be rendered irrelevant without a single explosion. As the hours passed, survivors reported a strange phenomenon, a sense of calm from the humans despite the chaos. It was not arrogance, it was calculation. Each human vessel acted in perfect harmony with the others, ensuring that no misstep could occur and no misunderstanding could allow resistance to rebuild. The survivors began to understand the terrifying concept. The humans did not need to fight to win. They only needed to be there. Commander Velthorin documented every observation, understanding that history itself had been rewritten. Centuries of military doctrine, strategy, and empire building were suddenly meaningless. The humans had demonstrated ultimate control, not by destruction alone, but by observation, anticipation, and enforcement. The galaxy had learned a lesson that could never be unlearned. By the time the human fleet withdrew from the sector, the Zevral Union was left in ruins, scattered and humbled. Velthorin realized that the humans were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They did not need to destroy civilizations to assert dominance. They simply ensured that the outcomes they desired occurred, and any resistance was removed with precise efficiency. The galaxy would never again underestimate humanity. Nor would it forget the day when fleets vanished, not to explosions, but to absolute control. Survivors of the Karzun sector emerged from the chaos slowly, scattered across deep space. Systems that had once operated in perfect coordination now struggled to maintain communication. Entire sectors such as Velkar Reach and the Nitha Outer Ring had lost contact with major fleets. Orbital stations were abandoned or destroyed, and panic rippled through the remaining population. It was clear that the humans had not sought war in the conventional sense, yet the consequences of their arrival had reshaped the galaxy entirely. Command centers worked frantically to re-establish order, but the familiar hierarchies were gone. Chain of command had broken under the sudden disappearance of the fleet. Commanders tried to coordinate defenses with what remained, but every calculation was suspect, every decision delayed. Survivors realized that the humans had acted with a precision no species could match. Their methods were not brute force. They were final, absolute, and beyond comprehension. Commander Vale Thorin found himself among the few able to maintain some form of authority. But even he was overwhelmed. His flagship, the Dominion of Ashes, was barely functional. Critical systems had failed, and the ship's crew struggled to comprehend the scale of what had just happened. Vale Thorin called emergency meetings with surviving officers, each discussion marked by disbelief and quiet fear. Plans for retaliation, evacuation, or regrouping all seemed meaningless against a species that had proven control without combat. Across the galaxy, surviving leaders convened emergency councils, attempting to coordinate a response. But every plan was undermined by the knowledge that humans were not predictable in ways any alien civilization had considered. They did not act on fear, greed, or desire for conquest. They acted on calculation and principle, and that left no opening for negotiation or attack. The sectors that once wielded immense power were now powerless observers, forced to accept the reality the humans had imposed. News of the destruction and human presence spread slowly to the outer regions, causing chaos among civilian populations. Trade routes were disrupted, supply lines broken, and communication relays overloaded with anxious reports. The surviving Zevral Union worlds began to face the uncomfortable truth that survival was no longer a matter of military might, but of whether the humans permitted it. Fear became the new currency of civilization, replacing confidence and arrogance that had lasted for centuries. Vale Thorin reflected on the humans' strategy, understanding that they had never truly engaged in battle. They had eliminated the strongest fleets not with fire, but with control over forces no alien species had mastered. By the time the survivors attempted to counterattack, the humans had already demonstrated that such resistance was irrelevant. The lesson was clear. The humans decided outcomes, and any action outside their calculation was meaningless. Surviving fleets and planetary defenses were slowly reorganized, yet coordination remained tenuous. Mistrust and panic among commanders hindered planning. Officers debated whether retreat was even possible, whether hiding in remote sectors would ensure safety. But intelligence reports suggested that the human fleet could appear anywhere, observe without detection, and enforce consequences instantly. Hope diminished as strategy and experience proved inadequate against such power. Meanwhile, civilians and historians pieced together fragments of knowledge about humanity. Records previously dismissed as myth now gained terrifying credibility. The humans had survived countless adversities in isolation, developed technology and tactics that seemed impossible, and emerged as a species capable of enforcing their will with precision unmatched in the galaxy. Whispers of past legends now carried weight, and fear became a constant companion for those who remained. Vale Thorin's own thoughts turned inward as he considered the consequences for the surviving species. The humans had not destroyed for pleasure. They had removed obstacles and established control. Yet, the psychological impact was profound. Entire civilizations now understood the limits of their power. The era of overconfidence had ended, and survival was no longer guaranteed by strength, only by compliance with conditions humans would determine. Months passed, yet the human fleet remained largely absent, their presence now a shadow in the minds of leaders and citizens alike. The galaxy learned to operate under uncertainty, to respect boundaries that had never been defined, and to rebuild in a landscape where the strongest no longer dominated. Only the humans could. The surviving sectors faced a new reality, one in which strategy, alliances, and history mattered less than recognition of human authority. By the time some semblance of order returned, Commander Vale Thorin and other leaders realized that the galaxy had been fundamentally changed. Civilizations would continue to exist, but under the silent guidance of humans whose power had been demonstrated without destruction, the lesson was simple and unforgettable. Resistance was optional, but only if the humans allowed it, and the sectors that remained understood that the universe would never again underestimate humanity. Months passed after the destruction of the Zevral Union fleets, and the galaxy remained in a fragile state of recovery. Planets like Orthus Prime, Velkar Reach, and regions of the Netha Outer Ring struggled to rebuild communication networks and civilian infrastructure. Survivors of the previous attacks tried to restore order, yet the absence of their strongest fleets left them vulnerable. Fear and uncertainty ruled every decision, and every action was weighed against the invisible presence of the humans who had already demonstrated ultimate power. A final transmission arrived unexpectedly, traveling faster than normal subspace signals, its origin confirmed as the United Human Stellar Command. But this time the speaker was Commander Sarah Havelock, her voice calm, precise, and carrying authority without aggression. She spoke directly to the surviving leaders of the galaxy, stating that humanity preferred peace, but peace required respect for boundaries, and that any civilization had to understand consequences before it could continue without interference. The message made clear that humans had no interest in conquest for territory or resources, yet it emphasized that the galaxy had been observed, tested, and corrected. Every action had been measured, every fleet, station, and planetary defense accounted for. And any attempt to challenge the humans again would be met with consequences just as absolute as before. The tone left no room for negotiation or debate, only the recognition that survival depended on adherence to new, unspoken rules. Survivors listened carefully, realizing that the humans did not act out of malice, pride, or revenge, but out of principle and logic. They had eliminated fleets not to conquer, but to demonstrate the limits of conventional power. And by doing so, they had established a new order in which the galaxy had to acknowledge human authority without question. The lesson was unforgettable. Humans did not need to fight to win. They only needed to enforce outcomes. Leaders like Commander Vale Thorin began to record and analyze every detail of the encounters. Understanding that history had been rewritten, centuries of military doctrine and empire building had been rendered meaningless. The humans had enforced their will, not through prolonged war, but through precision and control, and the knowledge of their capabilities spread throughout remaining sectors, like wildfire, influencing every decision in politics, trade, and defense. Civilians and historians pieced together fragments of data, attempting to understand the humans' origins, technological development, and motivations. Previously dismissed records of humanity from the Soul Fringe Expanse now held terrifying credibility. Stories of survival through adversity, cunning strategy, and long-term planning painted a picture of a species that had quietly mastered the rules of the galaxy, while others focused on short-term power. Even after the human fleet disappeared into uncharted space, their presence remained a constant shadow over the galaxy. Sectors reorganized their defenses, not to challenge humans, but to survive within the framework implicitly defined by them. Every political council, military planner, and civilian leader operated under the knowledge that humans had the power to enforce outcomes instantly, and had chosen to do so once, demonstrating the consequences of underestimating them. Commander Havelock's final words reinforced the reality the galaxy now faced. She emphasized that humans preferred peace, but that peace required memory, accountability, and understanding. Any civilization that failed to recognize these limits risked the same fate as the fleets that had vanished in minutes. The message was clear. The humans did not rule by fear, but by certainty, and that certainty would guide the galaxy's future. As the weeks turned into months, the surviving sectors slowly resumed operations. Trade routes reopened cautiously. Research stations restarted monitoring, and survivors shared their experiences. Yet every decision, from political treaties to fleet movements, was influenced by the knowledge that the humans could intervene if boundaries were ignored. The galaxy had learned to respect the power that had silently established itself without conquest. Vale Thorin and other leaders accepted the new order with reluctant understanding. Their authority remained, but they operated under the invisible oversight of a species whose reach could not be measured by fleets or weapons alone. The humans had left, but their lesson endured, shaping the culture, strategy, and survival of every civilization that remained. And for the first time in history, the galaxy recognized that its fate was no longer determined by strength or numbers, but by the humans' decision to allow it to exist. In the quiet that followed, as systems stabilized and survivors attempted to return to normalcy, the galaxy finally understood the ultimate truth. Humanity did not conquer, they decided. And every corner of space remembered the moment when fleets vanished. Stars trembled, and the galaxy learned that survival depended not on fighting, but on recognition of a power far beyond anything previously imagined.